opportunity to just spend 10 minutes relaying some of the things which I do with a bit more time and space quite regularly within DFID. So I've had the privilege over the last couple of years of running an internal program on knowledge management and organisational learning for folks across DFID in Abercrombie and here, as well as some dedicated teams. And some of you may have been on one of those programs. Just raise your hand if you've been on one of those programs. So I know, okay, a few from the faces, excellent. Can't see Abercrombie, I'm sure there's some hands up there. So I'm not going to repeat everything I've said in 10 minutes, don't worry. But as part of that program, we cover some development-related examples of what does good look like for organisational learning. We learn from the UNAIDS, we look at tier funds, look at others, look at an internal model that we spent some time developing. And we also draw on some external examples and just to see what can we draw in from the way totally different organisations operate. And I want to do that just for 5 or 10 minutes today, to just dip into one of those examples. An example, as you can see behind me, is from the Olympic Games, or particularly from the International Olympic Committee. So hugely complex, bureaucratic, dramatically scrutinised from the world, and with a somewhat aggressive tabloid press now, increasingly so, operating in very complex environments under huge time pressures, immovable deadlines, and multiple cultures. So an interesting challenge. And if we just have to look back through, last year, a couple of years ago, that happened, and then 2 years ago, this happened. So Beijing was awarded the 2022 Winter Games, and then of course last year, we know very well, that happened. And then in next year, this is going to happen, Pyeongchang Winter Games in South Korea, and then 2 years later, Tokyo will host the Summer Games, and then 2 years after that, Beijing will have to deliver on what 7 years previously was awarded to them during the bidding process. So there's this huge repetition of different yet similar, massive, complex projects going on around the world. And the IOC has a challenge of ensuring that knowledge and learning flows between the different editions of the Games. And how do they do that? And that's something that we explore in depth during my program. But let me jump to maybe some of the answers for you here. So here's how they describe it. They say every 2 years we start a new project. It's the largest peacetime mobilisation of people anywhere in the world, and they go from 0 to around 100,000 staff, and 0 to $10 billion plus, in a new country, new culture, with a brand new team. So what a wonderful opportunity for organisational learning and knowledge management to prove themselves, because the one thing the Olympics aren't is a surprise. We know they're coming, and if you're the host city, you know it's coming. You have 7 years advanced notice. And there is a cycle, if you like, a planning cycle they go through. They look at it on a 10-year basis. 3 years is about bidding, so you never quite know who's going to win the bid. And then from year 3 onwards, you're working with the host city. And they start with a very small team, and they build up, as you can see from the peaks, to 100,000 staff. But they need to invest learning into a much smaller team much earlier, so that when the operational readiness phase happens, they're ready to download that learning into a much broader team. They don't have time to help everybody to learn, so they have to invest in a team earlier, such that it can be kind of downloaded at a later stage. And that's a huge challenge for a very small knowledge and learning team. And as if it wasn't enough to do it for one hugely complex project, they have to do it for up to 6 at any one moment in time, as the timelines, one's starting, one's planning, one's bidding, one's executing, one's reviewing what they've done in order to help the rest of the organisation. And it's so massively complex. And then add into that, moving from Rio in the west to the next 3 games being in the Far East, you can get a flavour for the complexity they have to deal with. So what do they do? What are the kind of things that they can do to support learning in this hugely complex environment, but an environment where there is a huge appetite for learning, a huge demand. There's a professional desire to do things well, and there's probably a little bit of fear of doing things badly, combining to create a huge hunger for learning. We don't always have the luxury of that hunger for learning as we approach projects, but they do within the IOC. So what do? How do we can enter their learning cycle at any point, because that's the nature of learning cycles. Let's start with learning after doing. What do they do after the games? Or what do they do after activities? They're very good at supporting learning in the moment. You just built the velodrome. Let's do a knowledge report on that. Let's bring in somebody to facilitate a workshop. Let's draw out the lessons, and let's find a way to codify that in a way which is readable, which is full of narrative and examples and stories and context. At the end of the games proper, there will be a much bigger debrief process. 6 days set aside, 300-400 people was the experience for London 2012. They did it in November, but they didn't do it in some rainy room in London, they did it in Rio. Now that's a bit more fun, I grant you. However, the main reason for doing it in Rio was that that's where the customer was for the learning. That was the real customer, the next team, the next project, the next Olympic Games. So doing it in their presence and allowing 50% of the time for informal networking and question asking outside of the meeting rooms was built into their learning process, because it's a social process as much as it's a process of generating reports. So learning after doing, they do through kind of structured reporting, reviewing, debriefing, but also combined with networking. Capturing out of that, there are videos, there are kind of event reports, knowledge reports, but also in a more interesting way, they, rather than saying this is everything we knew about London or everything we knew about Rio, they do some more thematic curation of knowledge. So there will be something like 30, they used to call them technical manuals, they now call them reference materials. So repeatable areas that you know every Olympic Games will have to deliver on. Every Games will worry about security, about opening ceremonies, about ticketing, about transport, about other infrastructure projects, about, there'll be a whole suite of repeatable activities, and those are the areas around which knowledge is gathered, refined, stories and examples often offer access to expertise and experts and experience is structured, and they build these reference materials and the people around that in order to support that. So there's a huge amount of curation and capturing, but it's done on a thematic basis. And every time you host the games, whenever you host the games, you have an obligation commercially to offer up into that living document of evidence, narrative, examples, people, connections for the benefit of the future games. So you wouldn't win the games unless you could demonstrate your commitment and your ability to do that. And then, of course, most importantly of all, we get to somebody learning before doing, so they can take advantage of all this wonderful effort and contractual obligations and wonderful systems and extranets that exist to support that. So in terms of learning before doing, yes, they have access to all of this wonderful captured and multimedia-rich evidence, but they also have access to people. So there are a whole number of people processes that the game supports around mentoring, shadowing, around secondment for maybe up to a year's worth of secondment, doing a real job in a future games team so that you're ready to go and you see everything. When you're in the games for a year, you know where the bodies are buried at that point. They also do an observation program, observer visits, where people will go for a few days to visit future games at different stages of its development, carefully kind of managed so the people offering what they're learning isn't distracting them from the visit, isn't distracting them from delivery. But there's a deliberate process to bring people together, to observe, to learn by observing, to bring, in the case of Sochi, they brought 7,000 questions to Vancouver on a huge spreadsheet and made sure they worked through those, and they pulled the knowledge they needed. If they didn't get it there and then, they got it through the debrief at the end. So a whole number of people, processes and connections made for learning before doing. So they have this whole cycle, learning before, from observation and from evidence bases, learning after doing to generate learning for future teams, and some quite sophisticated ways of capturing knowledge, learning examples, recommendations, and hard data. If you want to know how much the Chinese spent feeding the athletes for the Beijing Games, then you can find that. But if you want someone to talk to share their opinion or their personal experience or story as to what happened in Sochi around what happened when that 5th Olympic ring didn't open up, you can find that person. So it's a mixture of soft and hard, collections and connections, people and evidence. And so I wonder whether maybe there are some similar hurdles and similar examples for you guys in all the development, but I'm going to let you make those connections because I'm sure there'll be plenty.